Ted Cruz didn't just expose Adam Schiff's political maneuvering, he weaponized the Democrats' own quotes to dismantle Schiff's defense in real time. Drop a comment below if you've ever seen a confrontation this calculated. Instead of merely calling Adam Schiff a deceiver, he executed something far more devastating. He produced the exact statements of Schiff's own political party, highlighting the precise moments when 250 Democrats condemned universal injunctions as a severe threat and delivered them right back into Schiff's face one by one. Following this, he demanded to know why Schiff's colleagues were now fiercely protecting the very tactic they previously sought to destroy. And incredibly, that was merely the opening 10 minutes of the exchange. The events that unfolded next created a scenario from which Schiff would likely never recover. Ted Cruz made sure to arrive well ahead of schedule. His documents were perfectly aligned on his desk long before the first staff member even came through the door. There were two distinct piles of paper, one thick, one thin, accompanied by a pen positioned in perfect parallel to the edge of his nameplate. The thinner stack was placed deliberately on top. He didn't even glance at it, because he simply didn't need to. He had orchestrated this entire hearing with the meticulous precision of a contractor building a house. The foundation was poured weeks ago, and today was framing day. Adam Schiff walked in the way he always walks into rooms like this, unhurried. He offered a half nod to a staffer on his left, followed by a brief word with the senator beside him. As he settled into his chair, he adjusted his microphone with one hand, casual, the way a man adjusts a rearview mirror before a drive he has taken 1,000 times. This was the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was a member, and whatever anyone thought about how he got here, he was undeniably here. That confidence is worth remembering. Hold on to it, because it will not last the hour. The hearing was about something that had been happening across the country, one judge, in one courtroom, issuing an order that froze the entire Trump administration from enforcing its policies, not just in that judge's district, but everywhere. With one signature, 330 million Americans were bound by it. They call it a universal injunction, and Cruz called it the second phase of lawfare. This is what it looks like, Cruz told the room, and the room was listening. When the other side loses an election and decides the voters were wrong, they realize they could not beat him at the ballot box. They could not indict their way to victory. So now, they are shopping for judges, one at a time, in the bluest districts they can find. Cruz laid the numbers flat. Under Obama, the total count of nationwide injunctions over 8 years could be counted on 2 hands. Under Trump, in the first 100 days alone, the number had already passed what most administrations see in a full term. He did not editorialize the numbers, he just read them. Then he set the paper down and looked across the room. Schiff leaned forward, his counterattack well practiced. The words came out clean. The reason there are so many injunctions, Senator, is that this administration is violating the Constitution at a pace this country has never seen, he asserted. Judges are not the problem. The lawlessness is the problem. It was a good line that landed with the Democratic staffers. 2 of them exchanged a glance that said, "That will make the clip." And in another hearing, against another opponent, it might have been enough. Cruz did not dismiss it. He nodded once, the way a mechanic nods when you describe the noise your car is making, and then he asked the question that changed the room. If the law is so clearly on your side, Senator, then why are these cases not filed in conservative districts? Why are they not filed in front of Trump-appointed judges? If the Constitution speaks as loudly as you say it does, any judge in any courtroom should hear it. So why do your attorneys general keep driving past every red district in the country to find the one blue judge who will give them what they want? Schiff's mouth opened. Then it closed. Then it opened again. The answer he gave was longer than the question. It talked about jurisdiction, about standing, about the complexities of federal litigation. Every word of it was technically defensible, and absolutely none of it answered what Cruz had actually asked. A good attorney knows the difference between a response and an answer. So does a room full of people who just watched a man dodge a straight question with a paragraph. A staffer in the back row stopped typing just for a second, then started again. Cruz did not let the air settle. He had a case, a specific one. A single district judge in a blue jurisdiction who had issued a nationwide order freezing funds that Congress had already appropriated. Not just in her district, everywhere. One courtroom, one opinion, 330 million people bound by one signature. That is not judicial review, Cruz said. That is policy by geography. That is a system where the outcome depends not on the law, but on which courthouse you walk into, and everyone in this room knows it. Schiff came back. He talked about the separation of powers. He talked about the judiciary as the last line of defense against executive overreach. He talked about the Constitution as a living safeguard. And he was not wrong, technically. But Cruz had not asked about theory. He had asked about practice. And the practice had a pattern. And the pattern had a zip code. And everyone in the room could read a map. Under our system, Cruz said, the voters elect a president. The president sets policy. If the policy is unlawful, the courts can act. But what is happening here is not the courts acting. It is one judge in one district, chosen because of geography, overruling the will of the entire electorate. He looked at Schiff. You know the difference, Senator. The question is whether you care about the difference when the judge is on your side. That question hung in the room because it was not really about judges. It was about something older and simpler. It was about whether rules apply the same way to both sides, or only when it is convenient. Every person listening to this hearing understood that question. They did not need a law degree. Your vote, your president, your policy, overruled by one judge in one courthouse that nobody on your side ever got to walk into. And the people who made that happen are the same people who spent 3 years screaming that one judge should not have that power. Schiff straightened his papers. The gesture was small, but the timing said everything. He responded with precedent, with the framework of checks and balances. Every sentence was structurally sound. Every sentence missed the point, because Cruz was not questioning whether courts have authority. He was questioning why one party only discovers that authority when the geography is favorable. Cruz had asked a question. Schiff had answered it. But the answer had a crack in it, and everyone in the room could hear it. And that crack was about to get a lot wider. Cruz was not done with the question, he was only done with the warm-up. He reached for the thin stack, the one he had not touched, the one that had been sitting there since before Schiff walked in. He opened it the way a man opens an envelope he has been saving. Not fast, not slow, but deliberate. The room tracked his hands. I want to read something, Cruz said, and I want to be clear about who said it. What followed was not an argument, it was an autopsy performed on the living. Cruz began reading quotes, not his quotes, not Republican quotes, but Democratic quotes. From Democratic senators, from Democratic briefs, from Democratic press conferences. Their words, their signatures, their press releases, all about the same exact thing, the danger of one judge deciding policy for the entire country. The first quote was from Chuck Schumer, April 2023. A single federal judge in Texas had tried to pull mifepristone off the market nationwide with one ruling. Schumer had called it a radical act by one judge, trying to overrule the will of the American people. The second was from Dick Durbin, the same week. He called the ruling a draconian decision by a single federal judge seeking to deny millions of women access to an FDA-approved medication. Cruz read them the way you read an itemized bill to someone who forgot they ordered everything on it. The gallery shifted. Someone in the second row leaned forward. The room was beginning to see where this was going. Cruz was not finished. He had the brief. Over 250 Democratic lawmakers had filed a formal legal brief warning the Supreme Court about what they called the perilous consequences of letting one district judge set nationwide policy through a single injunction. Lambe-Wusher. They had called it a threat to the constitutional order. They had begged the court to put a stop to it. Cruz looked up from the paper. "Senator Schiff," he said, and the room was very still. When a conservative judge in Texas used one of these injunctions to block an FDA-approved drug, your side called it judicial tyranny. When a liberal judge in Rhode Island uses the same tool to block the President of the United States from executing the law, your side calls it the rule of law. He set the paper down. Which one is it? Schiff took a breath. The answer came, and it was about context, about distinguishing between lawful executive action and unlawful executive action, about the role of the judiciary in checking the executive branch. Every word sounded correct if you were reading a law review article. Every word sounded like evasion if you had just heard the man get caught saying the opposite thing 3 years ago. Cruz, let him talk. That was the worst part. He did not interrupt. He did not redirect. He sat back and let Adam Schiff fill the silence with words that everyone in the room could measure against the quotes still sitting on the table. A reporter in the gallery wrote something and underlined it. A Democratic staffer 2 seats down from Schiff looked at her phone. The room was doing the math. Schiff reached for the water glass. This time he drank from it, taking a slow sip, the kind that buys 2 seconds of not having to speak. Cruz picked up one more sheet. "One more," he said. "April 2024. Senate Democrats on the floor." He read the quote. It was about right-wing activists exploiting the judicial system, about unelected judges thrashing democracy, about one person in a black robe overruling the will of 330 million Americans. Cruz set the paper down on top of the others. A neat stack, a complete record. Those are your words, Senator. Your party's words, your colleagues' words, signed, filed, and entered into the record. Let me say that again so it is clear. 250 Democratic lawmakers told the Supreme Court that universal injunctions were dangerous, and now they are standing behind universal injunctions. Same tool, same power, different president. He paused. Not a dramatic pause, but a carpenter's pause. The pause you take after you drive the last nail and step back to see if the frame is square. The only thing that changed is which judges are doing it. That sentence landed in the room, and nobody touched it. The receipts had come due, and the signature on every one of them was deeply familiar. But here is the thing. Everything up to this point was about policy, about judges and injunctions and the mechanics of federal courts. What comes next is not about policy. What comes next is about Adam Schiff. Something changed. Not in the room, but in Cruz. He leaned back. He set down the paper he had been reading from and placed both hands flat on the desk, the way a man steadies himself before he lifts something incredibly heavy. What he was about to say, he did not need notes for. "Senator Schiff," Cruz said, and there was something in his voice now that had not been there before, something lower, something that had been waiting patiently. "Let me ask you about something else. Let me ask you about the record." Everyone in that room knew what the record meant when it came to Adam Schiff. They had been watching it build for 7 years, and they had been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud, under the lights, with the cameras running. Cruz started where it started. "You told the American people on national television, multiple times, that you had seen evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. You said it was, and I am quoting you, in plain sight." Cruz's voice was remarkably even and flat, the voice of a man reading coordinates, not opinions. "You said that as the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. You said it with the authority of classified briefings that no one else in the country could verify." Schiff shifted in his chair. It was not a lean, not a minor adjustment, but a total repositioning. "Robert Mueller investigated for 22 months, Cruz continued. "Hundreds of subpoenas, hundreds of witnesses. His report did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government. Those are not my words. Those are the special counsel's words. The gallery was entirely still. Then came Special Counsel Durham. 3 years, a full investigation into the origins of the Russia probe. His conclusion: the FBI had no verified intelligence when it opened its investigation. The Steele dossier, the document your committee read into the congressional record as though it were evidence, was a collection of unverified claims funded by the opposing political campaign. Cruz let that sentence sit. He let the room hold it. Where is the evidence, Senator? You told the American people you had it. You said it was in plain sight. You said it not once, not twice, but over and over, on camera after camera, to audience after audience. Where is it? He was not asking because he did not know the answer. Everyone in that room knew the answer. Everyone listening at home knew the answer. Cruz wanted Adam Schiff to say it with the cameras on and the record sitting directly on the table between them. Schiff leaned into the microphone. His voice came back harder now. He talked about Trump's conduct. He talked about the Mueller report documenting obstruction. He talked about the broader pattern of behavior. The words came fast. They were highly practiced words, the same exact words he had used on CNN, on MSNBC, on every cable show that would book him. Hundreds of appearances in the president's first 2 years in office alone. But in this room, under these lights, with the findings from Mueller and Durham sitting on the table in front of the man asking the question, the practiced words sounded fundamentally different. They sounded like directions to a house that was no longer there. And remember, every single person listening to this at home already knew that. They had known it for years. They had been saying it at kitchen tables and in living rooms and in comment sections ever since 2019. The monumental difference was that now, in this room, Ted Cruz was saying it with a microphone, and Adam Schiff was sitting just 6 feet away with nowhere to go. But the evidence was not even the worst of it. You also wrote a memo, Cruz said, and now his hand moved to a different page. Schiff's eyes tightly tracked it. In February 2018, your committee released a memorandum defending the FISA warrant applications. Let me explain what that means. The government used a secret court to get permission to surveil Carter Page, an American citizen. Your colleague Devin Nunes raised the alarm. He said the applications were full of errors. Your memo was the rebuttal. Your memo told the American people that the FBI and the Department of Justice did not abuse the process, that they did not omit material information, that the system worked. Cruz set the paper down. The room knew what was coming next. Anyone who had followed this story for the last 7 years knew precisely what was coming next. Inspector General Horowitz investigated those same applications. He found 17 significant errors and omissions. 17. Not minor clerical issues. Significant errors that actively concealed information the court needed to see. The presiding judge of the FISA court stated publicly that the FBI misled the court. Cruz let the number sit. Certzi. In a system where one single error can destroy a citizen's rights, the FBI had committed 17, and Adam Schiff had confidently told the country the process was clean. Schiff's hand moved to the microphone stem, gripping it tightly. You told America the process was clean, Senator. It was not clean. And you had access to the exact same classified information your colleague used to raise the alarm. He raised it. You buried it. And then Cruz went to the place the entire room had been waiting for. The thing that for 7 long years had sat in the national memory like an unreachable splinter. Cruz paused. He closed the folder in front of him. He set it completely to the side. When he spoke again, he did not look at his notes. He did not look at the gallery. He looked directly at Adam Schiff. The way you look at someone across a kitchen table when you are about to say the undeniable truth you have been holding back all evening. The 26th of September 2019. Cruz slowed down, It was not for dramatic flair, but for absolute accuracy. On that date, Cruz said, you sat as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. The acting director of national intelligence was testifying before your committee about the Ukraine whistleblower complaint. The White House had released its readout of the president's call with President Zelensky. The public had the document. The press had the document. Your committee had the document. Cruz reached for a single sheet of paper. He did not read from it immediately. He held it flat on the desk and looked across the room at Schiff. For a moment, nobody in the room moved an inch. Not the staffers, not the gallery, not the camera operators. Everyone in that room understood exactly what was printed on that piece of paper. 7 years of claims, 7 years of television appearances, 7 years of evidence hiding in plain sight, and it all completely came down to what was on this one single sheet. You looked into the camera, Cruz said. You appeared to be reading from the official record, and you said this. He read the words slowly. I have a favor I want from you, and I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good. I want you to manufacture negative material on my political opponent. Understand, lots of it. On this and on that. Cruz set the paper down. The sound of it touching the desk was the only sound audible in the entire room. Every person listening to this knew those words. They had heard Schiff say them on live television in 2019. Now they were hearing them read back to him by a man who possessed no intention of letting him walk away from them. Those words are not in the call readout. Those words do not exist in any government document anywhere. You wrote them yourself. You read them into the congressional record under the seal of the House Intelligence Committee, utilizing the authority of your chairmanship, and you presented them to the American people as though they came directly from the President of the United States. The room was a collectively held breath. And when you were caught, Cruz said, his voice refusing to rise, which is exactly what made the accusation land so heavily, you called it a parody. Schiff's voice climbed half a register. He began to rapidly respond. He talked about the essence of the call. He aggressively argued about the substance being accurate, even if the words were dramatized. His hands left the table, moving wildly in the air. The gestures were far wider than his words needed. The volume was significantly higher than the microphone required. He was not answering the question. He was filling the air with sound because sound was the only weapon he had left. Because the alternative was silence. And silence would have been a full confession. Cruz did not interrupt him. He simply watched the way you watch someone try to drive out of a parking spot they have completely wedged themselves into, furiously turning the wheel back and forth, making the space smaller with every desperate attempt. The gavel came down once order. The sharp sound of it cut Schiff's sentence in half, and the half that remained hanging in the air was not the half that helped him. A camera operator in the back quickly adjusted his angle. He was no longer on a two-shot of the senators. He was solely on one face, the face of a man whose argument had completely run out of room long before his mouth ran out of words. The gallery instinctively knew they were witnessing something that would be replayed endlessly, not because it was incredibly dramatic, but because it was undeniably final. Cruz looked squarely at Schiff. He let the room settle. He let the suffocating silence do its work for 3 seconds, which in a congressional hearing room is a remarkably long time. The American people did not elect you to write fiction, Senator. They did not grant you a security clearance so you could invent quotes and falsely attribute them to the president. And they remember. That sentence landed in the room with authority and did not leave. And then Adam Schiff attempted to get back up. Schiff tried one final time. He leaned into the microphone the way he had leaned into microphones for years, and he passionately talked about the threat to democracy. He talked about authoritarian tendencies. He talked about the critical need to hold power accountable. Every word he chose was the right word. Every sentence he formed was the right sentence. And all of it arrived in the room like brand new furniture delivered to a house that had already burned to the ground. No one nodded in agreement. No staffer bothered to write it down. No colleague leaned in to support him. Cruz said absolutely nothing. He did not deliver a final, crushing blow. He simply moved on to the next item on the agenda. He did not need to announce that he had won. The room had already decided the victor. Schiff sat quietly in his chair, wearing the same suit, behind the same nameplate. His hands rested limply on the papers in front of him. An hour ago, those papers were potent ammunition. Now they were just useless paper. Not long ago, this exact same man stood in front of the House Intelligence Committee acting as its powerful chairman. He looked directly into the cameras with the kind of untouchable confidence that comes from knowing nobody in the room is going to challenge your narrative. He boldly stated he had evidence. He recited words that did not exist in any document and attributed them to the sitting president. He authored a memo defending a flawed process that 17 investigators later definitively confirmed was broken. He did all of this openly under the lights, backed by the authority of the most sensitive intelligence committee in Congress. And astonishingly, none of it had cost him. It didn't cost him his seat, his political career, or his next promotion. The system that was explicitly designed to hold him accountable had instead given him a standing ovation on the House floor and handed him a ticket to the Senate. That very man was sitting in this room now. He had the same hands, the same posture, the same measured blink. But everything that had previously made them dangerous was completely gone. The hearing moved on. The gavel fell perfectly on schedule. The relentless machinery of the Senate ground forward, steady and entirely indifferent to the political devastation that had just occurred inside it. His chair was still warm when he finally left. Nobody even watched him go. You knew the truth long before the Durham report ever came out. You knew before the Inspector General officially published his findings. You knew before the House vote, the reprimand, and the endless campaign ads. You knew the very second Adam Schiff stood at that podium, looked into the camera, and confidently declared, "Evidence in plain sight." And you looked across your dinner table or across your living room, and you stated, "He is fabricating it." You said it out loud, and nobody on that screen heard you. You said it, and the news network refused to correct him. You said it, and the national newspaper declined to print it. You said it. And the political system simply kept moving, kept booking him for interviews, kept promoting his brand, and kept handing him microphones and cameras and committee chairmanships as though you had said nothing at all. You were never wrong. You were not crazy conspiracy theorists. You were not misinformed citizens. You were not watching too much of the wrong news channel. You were watching a man actively deceive the country, and your common sense knew it. And the only thing that separated your intuition from the official record was simply time. And here is the exact reason why no one operating within that system could afford to hear your concerns. This is the part that burns much longer than the events of any single hearing. He enjoyed the protection of a massive media infrastructure that eagerly invited him onto their programs hundreds of times. And not a single time did they bother to ask the question that any first-year journalism student is trained to ask. You say, "You have evidence. Can you show it to us?" Not once. He said it was in plain sight, and they simply responded, "Thank you, Congressman." Then they cut to commercial break, and they eagerly booked him again for the following week. It was a devastating feedback loop of unchallenged claims cycling endlessly through millions of living rooms, where ordinary people trusted the man on the screen because the network trusted him or pretended to, which ultimately amounts to the exact same thing. And when the Durham report finally dropped, when the Inspector General thoroughly laid out 17 errors, when every single official investigation concluded exactly what you already knew, those same media networks did not go back and demand he explain himself. They simply moved on. They booked the next guest. They covered the next major story. The necessary correction never came because providing a correction was never the point. He had an entire political party that knew the truth and said absolutely nothing. Nancy Pelosi strategically made him the lead manager of the first impeachment. She did this not despite his record of deception, but precisely because of it. The sheer willingness to say the thing that needed to be said, regardless of whether it held any truth, was not viewed as a liability in that caucus. It was viewed as a primary qualification, and when the House eventually voted to formally reprimand Adam Schiff in June 2023, the Democratic caucus immediately surrounded him on the floor. They hugged him. They cheered wildly. They aggressively chanted shame at the Republicans who had voted for the measure. They seamlessly turned a severe disciplinary action into a lucrative campaign ad and a fundraising email, and the strategy worked perfectly. He overwhelmingly won the California Senate race. He proudly walked into the Senate chamber. He sat right down on the powerful Judiciary Committee. Think about the sheer magnitude of that. The road from proven falsehood directly to a political promotion was completely unbroken. The very system that was supposed to hold him accountable practically handed him a massive raise instead. Adam Schiff did not make careless mistakes, he made calculated decisions. Let that reality fully sink in. Every television appearance was a deliberate choice. Every deceptive sentence was a calculated bet that the American people would never be allowed to see the underlying classified material, and his logic was that by the time the truth inevitably came out, the political damage would already be done, and the fast-paced news cycle would easily wash it all away. For 7 years, that exact bet paid off handsomely. Every fabrication landed. Every partisan investigation served its purpose. Every camera appearance successfully built the brand, and nobody within the establishment system possessed either the standing or the stomach to call the bet until he walked into that hearing room. What Ted Cruz accomplished in that hearing room was not overly complicated. It was not heroic, in the grandiose way movies make things heroic. He did not single-handedly save the Republic in a single afternoon. What he did was significantly smaller than that, and in some ways much harder. He sat directly across from a man who had spent 7 long years constructing an impenetrable fortress out of claims that had zero foundation. And he simply asked the hard questions. He didn't do it behind closed doors. Nor did he do it in a cable news segment where Schiff could simply hang up the call. He did it out loud, directly under the lights, with the cameras actively running and the microphone perfectly tuned, and Adam Schiff sitting 6 feet away with absolutely no producer to cut to commercial, and no friendly anchor to suddenly change the subject. He openly said the thing the room already knew to be true. He just stated it in a place where Schiff was forced to sit and hear it. You were not crazy. You were just incredibly early. The coat of paint hiding the truth is much thinner now. It gets visibly thinner every single time someone possesses the courage to say it out loud. And the next time Adam Schiff confidently leans into that microphone and attempts to tell the country what he claims to know, the entire country will instantly remember the specific day Ted Cruz demanded him to prove it, and he fundamentally could not. That is a definitive reality he cannot simply parody his way out of. If you have been waiting 7 long years to finally hear someone say this out loud, ensure you send this to someone who has been waiting just as patiently.